and welcome to Perspectives, where we take a deep dive into the issues of the day and where we take a look at people's opinions on such issues. I am Ruth Osime. Welcome back to Perspectives, the Honorized News. Today, we discuss the devastating events that have plunged families and communities into profound mourning, with a total of 67 lives lost. In Ibadan, a school fair ended in tragedy as a stampede claimed 35 children, leaving families shattered. In Anambra, 22 lives were lost in a similar incident in Okija. And in Abuja, a church event meant to provide relief saw 10 lives, including 4 children, taken in another stampede. Most of the victims were women and children who had waited for hours in hope, driven by hunger ravaging the land, only to face unimaginable tragedy. As the organizers face scrutiny, questions arise about who should be blamed for the lack of safety measures to protect the most vulnerable and also what has led to this vulnerability. Today, we delve into the role of law enforcement, government, and society. Join us as we honor the lives lost, uncover the factors that led to these tragedies, and discuss the urgent steps needed to ensure such goodwill never causes such disasters again. We're heading for a short break, but stay with us because up next will be our guest in the show, Liberals Oshoma and Dr. Kabi Adamu. Perspectives will return in just a moment. Welcome back to Perspectives, the Honorized News. I'm being joined by Perspectives today by 2 eminently accomplished gentlemen in their respective fields of endeavor, starting in no particular order with lawyer and public affairs analyst, Liberals Oshoma. Mr. Oshoma, who is the principal partner at Liberals Oshoma Chambers, is also a writer and a known voice in Nigeria's human rights community. I'm also being joined by Dr. Kabi Adamu, a seasoned security risk management and intelligence executive, who is founder, Beacon Security and Intelligence Limited. Gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to have you both here on Perspectives to contribute to this solemn topic, as we all know of today. So, Liberals, first of all, your name is very unusual. Is it a biblical name? Because I've never heard it before.
Yes, it is. It means open-minded person.
Okay, just as you are.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, let's start with this conversation on a very sober note. The security and welfare of the people is the responsibility of the government, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
So is the right to food part of this responsibility, and can the loss of lives during this stampede be accredited to this?
Yeah, thank you very much. You see, some of us had consistently, criticized this nebulous nature of that, government, of that right, which is seen as a government obligation. The security and welfare of the people is the essence of government. And so to that extent, government shall eradicate all form of corruption, shall provide, food, provide security, ensure safety of lives and properties. But in the event that government fails to provide this, what happens? Nothing. So, and that's why people say that these rights should be justiciable. In India, chapter 2 of our constitution is modeled after theirs, so it's similar to theirs, which the fundamental objectives and directive principles of state policies. And what the court in that jurisdiction did was to interpret that these rights are justiciable, and that in the event that there's a failure to protect these rights, and then somebody can actually claim, damages against the government. But in this case, you find that well, even though the law, that's the ground norm, the Constitution says that the security and welfare of the people is the responsibility of government. Government has failed most times to provide food. And government policy also, one way or the other, directly or indirectly, had also occasioned hardship on the people. And then you find now individuals, acting as stopgap. And these individuals, the question is how well do they know what they are doing? And what are the collaborations, in all of this. So that's where the challenge is. But to answer your question directly, the right to food, it can be subsumed in that right, with that obligation of government to the people, not free food. Government is not to provide free food.
But in this case, the food was free, so how would you blame the government?
Because if you have enough, world over, people give.
The underlying factor is that
the underlying
land
factor is
this stampede.
Yes, because you have, this is not the first time. It is not just this administration.
Yeah.
So because the way this administration is making it seem is like, oh, everybody is saying it's because of this administration. No, we've had some stampede. I can even give you a rundown from 2014 till now. You know, the kind of, but if you look at all of them, the nature, illiteracy and poverty, it's the major cause of all of this. And so, the question is, if there is enough, will you have that number?
Yes.
Yeah, you go to Canada, you go to London, you see people queue up to go to restaurant to eat free food. You know, everybody will be on the queue. That mentality also is not here. And that's why during the day August time, you hear people are whipped to stay on the queue. You know, so if we had enough, if there were enough, you won't have that number.
Do you also think that disorderliness also plays a role, apart from the hunger and the land issue? Because, I mean, like you said, abroad, they serve free food, yes, and you don't see people falling over themselves and causing
disorderliness.
Mayhem.
You know, poverty, there are various kinds of poverty. Poverty of the mind, the normal poverty that you know, poverty of education, and the rest. So disorderliness is one of the major causes also. Like the one that happened in Ibadan here, you know, some parents having to push their children, you know, across the fence, you know. And in some cases also, if I think was it in Bauchi, a stampede that happened in Bauchi 2023, was a politician sharing food. You know, if you had enough, will you go to your constituency to be sharing bags of rice? You see some cases, politicians share 200 naira, 500 naira, you know, to their constituents.
It's true you mentioned that, because the house next to my house, there's the security officer there who every Friday gives out 500 naira.
If you look at...
And the queue...
Look,
they run into
during
thousands.
this Christmas period, if you look at... I don't know if you saw the video of those queuing up in Bodilon. And you know, when we say Bodilon, that's the president's unofficial residence. If you see the queue of people going to queue there for food, where else? If not in some countries in Africa.
In my case, where it's just a 500 naira, I remember asking my driver, where are these people coming from?
That's why a former governor in Abia State... Even the transport to get there is not more than that. That's why a former governor in Abia State could tell you that they give lactating mothers 500 naira. And he said, do you know what 500 naira can do? Because they have so impoverished the people that when they give 500 naira... In Kwara those days, people used to trek distance of...
Yes, that's what my dad was telling me.
To collect 200 naira.
2 hours
to collect 2 cups of rice. They share it, you know. So when people are so impoverished, every little drops you give to them
and even some of them, because I remember I used to ask my driver, because every Friday there's always traffic on my road. How do you know who you have given and who you have not given?
No, they have mechanism for sharing. No, they have mechanism for sharing. Some of them, I have witnessed a situation where politicians were sharing. What he did was to... when they wanted to, he just allowed everybody. That's why they build massive compounds with courtyard. They allowed everybody into the compound, and he will stand at the gates. He gives you, you go out. He gives you, you go out.
No, but some of them change different outfits.
No, they don't allow you back in again once you go out.
Okay, not like the street where there's no...
No, not like the street.
Okay.
So he stands on the gate. Sometimes, also, some of them, they will allow everybody to queue up. And then they have their details. They just move one person. You saw a video of how during the election they do this, how they were sharing money on the queue. Even in IDP camp, where you see politicians queue up and just, you know, hand money as peanuts to people. So it is basically, if you look at this, it is failure of that responsibility of government, and also, you know, hunger. World over, people share food. People give. You know, there's charity, but when there is so much massive failure on the part of the government, then the gap is so wide, and so you always have this kind of crowd.
Let's get to our Abuja guest. Are you there, Kabi? Hello? Is our Abuja guest there with us?
Yeah, I am. Good morning.
Good morning. So good to see you. So let me tell you, what are the risk assessments?
Same here. What
are the risk assessments that should have been done or should have been conducted, and what key factors should the organizers have covered for the safety of the people who were distributing the goods to?
Thank you very much. The most important thing in a risk assessment is to identify the hazards, the threats. In other words, what could likely happen that would create either safety or security concerns. Depending on the location, it could be stampede, like what we saw, and in certain instances, it could be someone wearing a suicide bomb and coming into the crowd and detonating. In other instances, it could be a security personnel who does not know how to handle his weapon very well, and then the gun goes off and in the process kills some individuals. So identifying hazards would be dependent on the location and the circumstances. But before then even, I think the most important question, which unfortunately I haven't had the discussion around that, is what is the best means to reach the indigent person, the needy person? Is gathering them the best means, or are there other more effective means? As an example, can you give food stamps? Can you give checks? Can you give, go to shops and identify the items that you want to give out, and then have a staggered process of encouraging those that you want to reach to go to those shops and collect those items after you've given them whatever access tips that you're going to give them. So that idea of gathering people in one place for the purpose of giving out, palliatives or whatever it is that those who claim humanitarians want to give. For me, it begs the question: what's the intention? Is the intention actually humanitarian, or are there other motives behind that kind of gathering? But suffice to say.
Sorry, I was just going to say, you mentioned food stamps.
I was going to say that
you mentioned food stamps being the best alternative, but the truth of the matter is that how would these food stamps be distributed? Is it not still in the same crowd manner? Would it not still be gathering the same crowd? And rather than giving them physical, heavyweight gifts, food, they give them stamps. How do you control that?
So I'll give you an example. In the Northeast, where because of the security circumstances in the Northeast of the country, where when they gather people, the bad guys, Jamaat al-Ahlissunnah al-Dawat wal-Jihad, or the Islamic State in West Africa province, will come to that location and detonate bombs. They moved to other methods, including identifying shop owners and coming to an agreement with those shop owners to say, okay, every month we will send you X, Y, Z of money. We've already done our stakeholder mapping. We know that there are 100 families that are in need of bags of rice. So these are the number of 100 families, these are their names, and this is the identification mechanism that you are going to use to make sure that particular family is the one that comes to you. And then those families are contacted, and perhaps stamps or some checks or whatever it is that we've decided as an organization that is the way that we are going to reach that family. And because there are 100 persons, we already know the number of shops that can accommodate that 100 persons, and then we give out those stamps to them. They're not going to go at the same time because we've given it to them unknown to each other. So they go to those shops at their time, they collect those items, and frankly, nothing has happened. This has been ongoing in parts of the Northeast for more than, as far as I know, 6-7 years, and not in one instance has any either stampede or any attack against those particular families, because it's become so institutionalized that it's part of the system. So it's doable.
Okay, thank you, Kabir. We'll come right back to you. Let me get back to liberals here. So what are the legal and ethical responsibilities of organizers when hosting an event that involves that crowd?
Yeah, please permit me to, in answering this question, to go a little bit into what my colleague, Dr. Kabir had said. When you talk about food stamp, yeah, it works when you know for sure that this would come. So it's
when who knows? The recipient.
When the recipient knows for sure that this would come, and so they are relaxed. But for somebody who does not know where the next meal will come from, when they say, "Oh, this man is sharing food tomorrow," or that they are going to issue food stamps, like you said, they will still go to these same places. And then the next thing is, how organized are these people sharing these stamps? You know, because it's a one-off thing. You have 100 bags of rice.
Aside from that, how can you ensure that it
you
will be delivered? If you give 100 stamps, would they deliver the 100 stamps or would they keep 5 or
exactly.
keep 20?
So that's another thing. You have, I hosted an event and I ended up sharing the drinks because I want to be sure that it goes round in a hall. Because if you sit down as the host, sometimes some of our guests might end up complaining that they didn't get drinks. That's how selfish some of us can be. So in a structured environment, these things work. So, but for a situation, but another thing, you also would blame some of the organizers. Since you know that annually you share food, it gets to a point you begin to identify those that actually needs this food. And then you employ people to go around and just drop the bags in their houses one after the other. Yeah,
but what else do they do to ensure safety apart from the fact that
apart from you know going to give this food?
Goodwill.
Yes, deliver them in their various you know houses. There are sometimes you are organizing maybe a party, a fun fair, and at the end of the fun fair you are also going to give out giveaway, what they call giveaway these days. So in such instances, you're not going to be delivering food to their houses. Because it's like...
No, but this was in a field. It wasn't in their houses that they were
that's what I'm saying. So for such feed, there should be more than one access point. There should be, it's like asking everybody to come vote in one point. There should be more than one access point entering into that feed. If you have a school with just one gate, certainly you're going to share food for a large crowd, you're going to have problems. But if that gate, you see stadiums, just watch a football match, in some of these stadiums, and 2 minutes after the match, the whole stadium is empty. You'll be wondering what happened.
Do you think this is where
they all have exits?
The organizer should have worked with the government officials.
Yes,
to ensure that this thing runs as
you can't possible. Be organizing such an event. You don't have, safety experts, government safety experts, private safety experts to ensure that, you get, like you talk about, risk assessment. You assess the risk and ensure, and because there are no consequences for such in this climb, we mourn, we just let it go. When there are issues like this, there should be, commensurate consequences. So in the absence of that, we'll get to that. In the absence of that, so organizers just feel, oh, yes, we'll get this feed, it's big enough. But there is no risk assessment. In the event that anything happens, we say, God forbid. In the event that anything happens, what are the exit points? Shouldn't there be
parameters put in place that you as an organizer needs to meet? Parameters
that's
that the government have put in place.
That's why we are reactive.
If you are going to have an event like that,
that's why we are reactive people. We are reactive people. We are not proactive. It is now that it has happened that every state government is putting press releases on measures. Just wait, those measures will be observed in breach. It's only in Lagos most times because the focus is heavy here, and that's why you hear that you can't organize a party in Lagos without the presence of LASMA. The event owner must have LASMA, for example. I'm just talking about parking because they know they might just come to tow people's vehicle, and then also you can't organize an event in Lagos, for example, with talk about adequate parking. And noise pollution also. You have an agency in Lagos State government that is strictly responsible for that because they know that there are consequences. But in other states where there are no consequences, in the villages, you just gather crowd and then, So what are these agencies? So we are a reactive people. When it happens, we begin to react. We are not being proactive. And so when there should be enough notices to everybody, including these humanitarian organizations, so that the do's and don'ts. You know that, okay, look, we're going to share food, but there are agencies that you must comply. There are prerequisites that you must meet to ensure, if the government says, henceforth, you can't gather, just because of the challenges in Borno, for example, in Northeast, you can't gather a crowd of 50%. During COVID, there were such measures. People were sharing. I was in Dolphin Estate one of these days, and I saw them sharing food, dropping foods at the gate of every resident. So you don't need to call all of them out to come give them, such. So you can also employ such measures, but There are, like I said, there are situations where it is, let's say, an event for children. And then such event, at the end of the day, you're going to share goodies. The sharing, there should be access point, or you should decentralize the sharing so that everybody will not have to gather in one spot. Yes. So because once you have that, it's going to create a problem.
Within the environment
within
itself,
the environment, within
the
venue itself, there should have been demarcation. You say, okay, from this age to this age, go this way. If you are this age to this age, go this way. Okay. If you are a child, come this way. You demarcate them. At the end of the day, it becomes easy and seamless.
Okay, we are going on a break right now, and we will continue this conversation. So grab your cup of tea or coffee, and see you right back. Welcome back to Perspectives. Can we have Kabir back in the house, please? So Kabir, I want to ask you, what provisions for first aid and medical assistance should have been available on site, and how should emergency response plans have been developed to address potential injuries or crises during the event?
Okay, so as part of the preparation for the event, safety should be paramount. In other words, does the organizer have an in-house capacity to deliver safety, including first aid? Now, if the answer is yes, then simulations should be conducted ahead. So let's say you have the capacity to deliver 1,000 items, and you've invited 1,000 persons, and you anticipate that perhaps 10 of those 1,000 persons could have one or the other form of safety issues. It could be just somebody out of sheer maybe dehydration or exposure to the elements, the person faints. So do you have first aid capacity to manage that before you call on first responders and all of that? So that in-house capacity is very important. And then, of course, the simulation that I talked about should be done to ensure that the capacity to deliver that first aid is actually there. Then the second point is to invite outsiders, and that means you should already reach out to them. You should have an agreement, and there are various first responders depending on what location you are in. Just like Laborious has mentioned, Lagos is a little bit advanced in that regard. There are several agencies in Lagos that can play the role of first responders, and a few other states in the country. But there are also federal government agencies and international development partners. The Red Cross has an advanced capacity for first responder role in different capacities. To an extent, depending on what the issue is, Doctors Without Borders can also play that role. And then, of course, the Federal Road Safety Agency, depending on what the issue is. And even to an extent, the police. So you should make sure you have the contacts of all of these organizations, depending on what event you are organizing. If it's an event that would require road management, of course, you should contact both the state and the federal agencies. And beyond contacting them, you should do a simulation and to ensure that their deployment rate would be as such that it would actually meet your needs. Because there is no point of you having an engagement, and then when the need arises and you call them, they don't really respond. So simulation is actually very important, both for the in-house safety response as well as for the external one that I've just mentioned.
Okay, thank you so much. So let's get back to the laborers in the house. Now, what evidence is required to establish claims for compensation for the families of the loved ones? And what does adequate compensation mean? And how is the amount due to them determined?
First and foremost, we have to establish that somebody is negligent before you begin to talk about compensation.
So who do you accuse for negligence?
Yeah, the organizers. I talked about the responsibility of government failure, which is not justiciable. That if you had enough food, and then you will now be talking about, yes, the people won't go out in such numbers. And then secondly, you then begin to talk about the organizers. If they had reached out, Dr. Kabir talked about, the medical personnel, road safety management.
Okay, but in this case, they didn't.
But if they had reached out.
But they didn't.
No, but sometimes you can reach out, and then by the time because of lack of stimulation, by the time you now call out for rescue, the time to get there. So if they...
In this case, That's not what happened.
Then
there were too many families, too many people for less food.
Okay, so if you now say,
7,500.
if you now look, if you look at section,
if lives are lost in this case,
if you look at section 343 of the criminal code, it defines negligence and also listed, categories of negligence. And then section 344 specifically talks about negligence of this nature. 6 months imprisonment, and also now that you have loss of lives, you can't now be just talking about negligence that becomes a misdemeanor. So in this case, are there options for civil claims? Yes, clearly there are options for civil claims. In other societies, that's where I'm coming to. In other societies, ordinarily for event of this nature, there must be insurance first. But here, nothing. The organizers, there are no insurance. Okay. So in the event of a disaster, then there will be insurance claim. And the kind of evidence you need to gather actually that, the organizers were negligent and that they owe you a duty to protect you, even though you came to collect goodwill. And such evidence would include what happened at the event, which is already public, and then also the injury that you suffered. If people died, the relatives or those that died, clearly, these are evidence that
So the organizers are the ones that will get sued?
Yes, because
they didn't meet all the parameters required for safety.
If the organizers now met the parameters, the organizer can now take out claim against the government to say, look, we actually...
in this case, most of them didn't.
That's where the problem is. So that's why the government is now behaving as if, as a big brother. Oh, look, we have to deal with this issue. We would investigate and ensure that anybody found culpable. But the major culprit here is the government.
Because of the hunger in the land?
Yes, because of the hunger in the land.
But legally, the major culprit are the organizers.
Legally speaking, the organizers also are culpable.
Because they did not meet the parameters required.
They were negligent.
To execute such exercise.
Yes, they were negligent.
Okay, that now clears the air on some parts. Can we get back to Kabir, please? Because there's only another to ask him. Kabir, in your professional opinion,
yeah, I'm with you.
In your professional opinion, what was the most significant oversight that led to these tragic events, aside from what Liberals has mentioned here?
So risk management and then capacity management. I think, in my honest opinion, those are the two things. I do not feel that advanced planning and risk management was conducted effectively. If it was, because advanced planning would have answered the critical question, is this the best way to deliver these items, or are there alternative, safer means to do that? And then the contingency planning too, that would have allowed the organizers to know, so you have 100 bags to distribute. And in this climate of poverty that we're in, you know that if you advertise that you have 100 bags, probably 1 million people will show up to collect those 100 bags. And that is a recipe for disaster. So that in itself would have told you to adopt. I do not think, in my honest opinion, that any organizer set out to kill people. In my honest opinion, I don't think that was the intention. But because they didn't do their advanced planning and risk management, what happened. Of course, the second component is capacity management. The location that they chose to carry out the activity. Did they consider the capacity of that location? Did they, just like the Boris mentioned, the entry and exit point? Did they consider all of that? And then, of course, even if, for instance, the location is small and the number of persons is huge, why didn't they adopt staggered entry and exit? If you have, like I said, 1,000 persons and you are distributing 100 and 5 million are coming, you can do staggered entry and exit. So let's say divide the day into 3 or 4 and say from 10 to 12, these are the number of persons that would be accommodated, then like that, so that at least you don't have all the persons coming at those point in time. But the bottom line, I think Liberians did highlight this, is the poverty level in the country at the moment, to an extent, and I say this with all sense of responsibility, has removed a level of sanity from most persons that are living in poverty, and the indigency level is as such that they are not reasonable. All they hear is food. And once they hear that food, then the instinct to go and get that food would kind of take over. And unfortunately, what happened. So I think the organizers missed out on this basic element that we're at a very, very, bad situation in the country where poverty has made a significant number of Nigerians to drop their level of reasonableness, and they are behaving in the manner that we saw, sadly.
Okay. So, Liberals, thank you so much for that, Kabir. Liberals, in the event that the parties fail to compensate the families, what other remedies are available to them, families of the victims?
Yeah, the families of the victims can take out class action against them, because government are also, we are, like I said, we're reactive people. When it happens, that's when people will make money from, the disease of other persons here, because the committees will be set up to look into it. Monies is going to be paid, ESTA codes and all of that. And so government will pretend to prosecute certain persons and you will never hear of it again. But the question is, what now happens to the victims? What remedy do they have? And if government cannot compensate them, and then the government will say the organizers are negligent, and yet the organizers also have failed to compensate them. So we meant well. Yes, we all meant well. One mean well, like Dr. Kabir said, nobody set out to go kill, sharing food. But your action or your inaction, or what you should do, or what you fail to do, can lead to the death. So in that state, that's why we say you were negligent. So if they are failure, they can take out a class action and ask that they be given, adequate compensation, but no amount, yes, including government, no amount is enough.
But
no amount is enough for the death of someone.
But government is not is apportioning blame strictly to the organizers and not taking credit for any.
But the first question let's stretch these discussions. Let's stretch it. What were the safety measures put in place by government?
Parameters that government put in place that the organizers needed to adhere to.
Let's assume that the organizers were unreasonable. Let's assume that they were unreasonable. But also, what parameters or what measures were put in place, either statutory or
like
otherwise,
said, like the organizers had to adhere
that
to.
The organizers must adhere to.
Yes.
That you say, oh, look, government, these are the rules, measures put in place.
But are there anybody designed for that, where so that things like this don't happen again? Are there any bodies that normally organizers should go to allow them host events like this?
There are no specifics, but like I said, in Lagos, for example, if you want to host such an event, you must, for vehicle management, at LASMA and road safety.
Okay, so LASMA
for
and road
noise
safety.
Noise pollution also. There are agencies, I've forgotten the name of the agency now, it's
because you have some residential areas that people have now turned to nightclubs and stop the neighbors.
Yes, you remember there was a nightclub somewhere in Ikoyi or VI that was...
I've heard of one or two being closed down.
And the Lagos State government sealed it up. Because there are regulations specific that you must including generator sounds.
Yes. Generator sound?
Yes, in Lagos.
But some generators are still very loud.
Have you been to some streets? Just go report. There's an agency. I've had calls to call.
There's an agency for that?
In Lagos State.
And what happened when you called?
I called them and they came to test the noise, the sound.
Seriously?
Yes, and they asked the man that the generator was too big for that neighborhood. That you should get a smaller one. Yes, in Lagos, I've had the cause to complain on behalf of a client. So there's no specific body.
I wasn't aware that things like that even exist.
There are, but in the event that there are regulations, there are no such regulations in other places. I don't know of any in Anambra, though. I don't know of any in
and like
Abuja.
You said, most of these things were in rural
so
areas.
It is now that it has happened. You now begin to hear, yes, every government, Lagos State government also re-echoed. Ondo State government did the same thing. But during COVID, there were protocols that must be observed when you have a crowd of more than.
Observed, funny enough.
Yes, a lot of because people were informed
and they were scared of dying.
People were scared of dying, and there were consequences. But despite that, you still some organizations will lock their doors and still break these protocols.
Like the former British Prime Minister.
Exactly. So if you stretch this conversation, that's not in this climate anyway, because we're always very defensive. But if you stretch it and say government owes me a responsibility, a duty,
because they didn't put things in place
and
to
they
avoid
put
such things happening.
things in place. That's like saying I had an accident because the roads are bad.
Okay.
Government will say, well, yes, we couldn't. It is not practicable
But is it possible
to fix.
to sue for that?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
You can. But at the end of the day, we hear people sue government in other countries because they had accident and the roads were bad. They say
What's the reliability of this?
Yes, you say we are vicariously liable because the roads were not fixed. But here, I doubt if you would get, if the courts are so magnanimous, because we want to play by the books. Our courts are not, we've not stretched our court to that extent, that magnanimity to say, yes, there's a responsibility here, there's a right here that had, been breached. Even though we say ubi jus ibi remedium.
What's that?
Where there's a right, there's a remedy.
Okay.
So here now, I would say that it is the organizers squarely. But except, as a smart lawyer, you want to stretch it and maybe probably drag a deeper pocket. How far that will go is a different
I'm curious. There's no cost there's no price that you can fix to life's lost. But in case one of the families of the victims is watching this program, in such a situation, how much, I don't want to put a figure to it, but how much approximately do you think they deserve for the loss?
I can't really. If
one of the families were to come to you now and wanted to sue the organizers or sue the government and what have you, and they're asking you how much can we get?
What usually you would look at would be what is their financial status presently.
Yeah, but like you said, there's no cost to a life.
Yes, there's no cost. Yes, there's no cost to a life. And then for a family that, if you're saying you want to sue for 10 billion, for example, for loss of one life, the court will look at it as being unreasonable.
So what's the reasonable figure?
If you say it's a class action, for a class action you can sue for 10, 15, 100 billion. The court will
billion or million?
Billion. Why should I sue for loss of life for 10 million or
so
1
they
million?
can get, these families can sue for?
No, the court will now look at,
all the lives lost.
Yes, for all the lives
collectively.
lost. Collectively, and then now say, okay, collectively, you award damages in so and
but
so.
Have any of these families
the massacre in OD?
Exactly. I was going to say, were they awarded damages?
Yes, the court eventually asked the federal government to compensate them. I can't remember now, but it should be, I think, about 200 and something billion.
And how many people died?
I can't actually remember the figure now, but I know there was damages awarded against the federal government, because that one was clearly an invasion against the federal government. But in this
case now, where it's now organized,
but in this case where it is organizer, there should be to some level, and also some parents are culpable. A situation where you take your child, through the fence, and you push that child innocuously into a gathering, and without also minding the consequences. Such parents also are culpable. They contributed to the negligence. So these are some of the actions that led to, even though you would say that if the organizers were proactive, like Dr. Kabi consistently said, the risk management factor was taken out of it. If they had assessed all of this, they know that some persons, we're going to do all of that. Then you have situations where
it's funny that you say that, because you now have to determine who is at fault. Whether
over
time you have to do more investigation.
Yes.
Probe deeper to see who was at fault and who wasn't.
What should have been done, what wasn't done, and all of this. And then at the end of the day, the problem for me is that we say leave it for God. And so there will be no lessons learned. I can tell you, from between 2014 to 2024, we've had 7 of such incidents.
And it always ended with
debts. And at the end, it's leave it for God. Anyway. Food sharing and some
we'll
jobs.
Continue.
You remember the job issue that had to do with, was it custom or immigration at the stadium? Some persons were jumping the fence. That one wasn't hunger. But people died, and we all left it for God. We're going
on a break right now, and then we'll be right back on Perspectives. See you right back soon. Welcome back to Perspectives. Okay, so we're almost rounding up. So let me ask each guest one question each. Dr. Kabi, are you in the house? I want to ask you one last question. Okay, good to see you. Now, what role does the public play in ensuring safety at events like this? And how can individuals behave responsibly to prevent chaos? How can the public better understand the risk involved in such events and help maintain order while waiting for food or aid distribution?
I think in simple terms is to acknowledge that at the end of the day, you have responsibility for your own life and your safety. And if you're a parent, you have responsibility for your children or your wards, whoever is under you. And so irrespective of what is being promised to you, you have to remember that if you are going to a location, perhaps ask question. What measures, what safety measures have been implemented by the organizer? If you don't get any reasonable response, I would advise you strongly that remember that it's your life. The second thing is to also take note what we call situation awareness. You go to a location and you don't see any access control. By access control, it means people who are standing at the either gate or door or entrance to manage people going in or going out. Or you see people coming in through different locations, for instance, forcing themselves through the fence. At that point, you need to tell yourself, it's not safe for me to be here. And so you go, because at the end of the day, you are responsible for your safety and security. There is no amount of palliatives that will be given to you that would be worth more than your life or worth more than your limb, or any part of your body that may end up being injured as a result of that. So I think it's that realization that we are, at the end of the day, responsible for our safety and our security. And where we don't see those measures, either by the organizers or by the government, we tell ourselves that we don't have to be in that location, and we move on.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kabir. Thank you so much for that very detailed response. So let me have one last word with you two also, liberals. What legal reforms, now that you said about this, what I find most discouraging is when you said, let's leave it for God.
Yeah.
Approach is what usually ends all this incidents. So what legal reforms or actions can ensure that similar incidents do not occur like this in future?
Like I said, it's first and foremost, you have this mentality and attitude of leave it for God. So when you have that mentality, nothing comes out of it. And so you have these reforms now, and over time, when it doesn't happen, we forget about them. And I can quickly tell you, remember in Bauchi, 2017, 5 people died, in a stampede for collecting 500 arms from a resident businessman, Kamal Magarfi. Lagos, remember the custom Lagos, February 2024, the rice stampede, in custom, and people that died, what happens, what's compensation? Port Harcourt stampede in 2022, where about 31 people were injured in a stampede in a church event, sharing of free food. Stampede in Nasarawa State 2024, where students died. They invaded the shops where rice were kept for distribution. Salah stampede in Kwara in 2023, where about 20 persons died when Saraki, former governor, was there distributing food items. Lagos church stampede in 2022, 2 persons died. Bauchi arms giving 2024 March. So all of this, there are no, when these things happen, we still fail to put specific measures in place. Government should now see this as a wake-up call. The idea of having a friend who was driving 5 Rolls Royce and now driving a Corolla, it's not a good enough, or the grant that he couldn't buy for, it's not a good enough, excuse for government. Secondly, government should know there are people also who were driving Corolla today who are trekking, not because they couldn't buy fuel, but because of the conditions, policies of government. Government should find a way to shed weight. And when you do that, you cannot put measures in place and insist that if these measures are not complied with, instead of setting up committees after the fact, set up committees that will ensure that such measures are complied with ab initio for events such as this, including churches and mosques, for crowd control, so that you avoid stampede. And any organization that is going to be involved in humanitarian food sharing, there should be laid down principles and rules and regulations that they must comply with. Failure to comply, the first thing should be that no matter the the intention, no matter how well intended, such food sharing should not take place, because we all agree that what is the value of a bag of rice for a man who at the end of the day will end up, losing his life and not getting the bag of rice? So it is better for government to even stop this food sharing because there are measures are not put in place than allow it and then everybody dies.
So you're saying they shouldn't even do it at all?
No, what I'm saying is government should ensure, instead of setting up, committees to investigate after the fact,
yes,
this committee should be in place.
Okay, ready. So that if any organizer
so that if there's any of such
thing,
event,
they must
you must meet with them.
Yes.
They sit down with you and ensure that all your plans are in place.
Yes.
And failure to cross the T's and dot the I's, the event should not even take place. Otherwise, you use other method. What if in that event, there's so much insecurity in the land, what if in that event somebody comes to detonate a bomb? We wouldn't be talking about Stampede now.
Yes.
Or somebody just shouts, there are people, or somebody just fire the shots in the air, maybe a trigger-happy policeman. So so all of this, or trigger-happy armed robber, police are bad. So all of these issues, there should be, a stand-up, body
so much.
that should be responsible for all of this. And then, lastly, the issue that Dr. Kabir raised cannot be overemphasized. Yes. The moment you get to this place, you also should do a risk management assessment to determine whether you want to remain, no matter the poverty level.
Thank you so much.
To determine whether you want to remain there or not.
Thank you so much, Liberals Oshoma. Thank you so much, Dr. Kabir, for being with us and for this very sensitive topic. Thank you so much for your intelligent and well-versed answers. Thank you for being with us. Now, as we reflect on these heartbreaking tragedies, we are reminded of the fragility of life and the urgent need for compassion, accountability, and decisive action. These losses must not be in vain. Together, let us build a future where joy is never overshadowed by tragedy, ensuring no child, no mother, no family ever endures such pain again in the pursuit of food. And as I keep saying, remember that life is a learning curve. That's all we have time for today. You've been watching Perspectives here on Rise News with me, Ruth Osime. God willing, we shall see you again next week. Until then, Happy New Year to everyone. Goodbye.